Every renewal season, somebody in the room asks me a version of the same question. Does any of this even matter in 10 years? Isn't the government just going to take this over, Blake? And the honest answer I used to give was a shrug. Maybe, probably not. Who knows? But that's kind of a terrible answer. So I built a model, 8,000 simulated futures of American healthcare. Every election cycle from 2028 through 2044. Government budget pressure, household economics, market trends, all of it's running at once. And it spits out a number. Actually, it spits out a lot of numbers. And today, I'm going to walk you through. Here's the headline. The odds that Congress passes a structural healthcare reform in the next 3 years are zero. And the odds that the individual market becomes the default way that Americans get health coverage by 2046 are 90%. Those two things are both true, but if it sounds like a contradiction, stay with me. That's the whole point of this video. But before we get there, the same disclosure I give every time. I'm a broker. I'm an employee benefits advisor at DSP Insurance Services. So when I tell you the group health plan is probably going away, understand that you're hearing it from somebody whose business is group health plans. It means I've got no incentive to tell you this. And it also means I might be wrong in ways that I can't see. So judge me on the math. Look at the model. Every assumption in this thing is published, and every one of them is a slider that you can move yourself. I'll show you where. And one more thing, this is not a political video. I'm not telling you what should happen. I'm telling you what the numbers say is likely to happen and what a CFO does about it either way. 4 parts. First, we define the thing because universal healthcare isn't one event. It's 6 different potential futures, and they all have wildly different odds. Second, the engine itself. There's one number that predicts reform attempts better than elections do, and almost nobody tracks it today. Third, the honest part, where this model is weakest and what happens to my conclusions when you attack it. And fourth, what you actually do with this information. 3 things that hold up no matter which future shows up down the line. Here's where every conversation about this goes wrong. People argue about universal healthcare like it's a single event that either happens or it doesn't. It's not. It's not binary. There's at least 6 different things people mean when they say universal healthcare, and they're nowhere near equally likely. Scenario 1, patchwork universality. Coverage quietly creeps past 97% through subsidies, auto enrollment, and Medicaid. Nothing structural changes. Your plans, the way you know them today, still exist. Scenario 2, a public option is introduced, a federal plan that's competing on the exchanges. Scenario 3, Medicare expansion. Eligibility drops to 60 or 55, or a buy-in opens up. Scenario 4, ICHRA migration. The individual market becomes the default. Group plans recede, no new laws required. Scenario 5, all payer rate setting. The Maryland model goes national. Plans stick around, but the pricing gets regulated. Scenario 6, full single payer. Medicare for all, employer coverage is eliminated, is a primary source of insurance. 6 different futures. Now, here are the 20-year odds on each one. Patchwork, 62%. Public option, 49%. Medicare expansion, 53%. ICHRA migration, 90%. All payer rate setting, 14%. Single payer, 7%. Look at that spread. When somebody says the odds of universal healthcare, which one are they talking about? Because the answer ranges from 7% to 90%. Let's sit on single payer for a second because it's the one that everybody pictures. 7% likelihood over 20 years. That's the scenario where your group plan is legally eliminated. 7% chance. It's low for a specific structural reason. Single payer needs the filibuster gone. It needs 50 votes, not 60. It's not just does the one party hold the government, it's does one party hold the government and change the Senate rules and spend the capital on this instead of everything else. You've got to stack 3 conditional probabilities and you get a pretty small number. Now, the short horizon, 3-year odds of any structural reform, 0. Not close to 0, they are 0. And that's not just me and the model being lazy, that's the model and us being literal about how Congress works. Big healthcare laws pass in the year after an election. When a new Congress gets seated with a mandate, the next windows are 2029, 2033, 2037, 2041, and 2045. There is no Congress capable of passing a major healthcare law that gets seated before 2029. So the 3-year number isn't really a probability, it's a calendar. Which means if you're making a decision in the next 3 renewal cycles, you can stop worrying about the law entirely. Nothing's coming. It's just a planning input. And then there's scenario 4, 90%. Hold that one. We'll come back to it because honestly, I think it's the whole story.
Here's the part that changed how I think about this. Almost every forecast of healthcare reform models it off elections. Who's in power? What's the majority? Can they get it through? History says that elections, though, are only half the story. The other half is a number that nobody looks at. It's how far premium growth has pulled ahead of wage growth, added up year over year. Not this year's premium increase, but the built up gap between the two. Think about it from the household side. 1 year of a 9% premium increase against a 3% raise, that stings, but you absorb it. 10 years of it, though, and you fundamentally lost ground. Your paycheck went up and your life got worse. That's when people get political about healthcare. Their employers are telling them their salary is increased, but it's not even enough to offset the increased deduction for their healthcare plans. So I backtested it. 1988 to 1993, premiums running double digits against 3 to 4% wage growth. By the time Clinton took office with majorities in both chambers, roughly 40 points of built up gap. The result? The Health Security Act, a major attempt, and it failed, but it did happen. 1999 to 2010, premiums were up 138%, with wages up only 42%. That's a huge gap entering 2009. The result? The Affordable Care Act, attempted and it passed. Now, here's the one that makes this a real test instead of a story. 2020 to 2025. It's the negative control. Family premiums went from about 21,300 to just under 27,000. That's up 26%, and it sounds really bad, right? Wages over that same stretch were up 28.6%. Wages actually outran premiums. There was no gap. And in 2021, one party held the House, the Senate, and the White House, a trifecta, the exact political condition everybody says you need, but nothing happened. No serious universal healthcare attempt, not one. That's the control case, and it's the most important row in the whole backtest. It means holding the government isn't sufficient. You need the government and the household pain at the same time. If the pain's not there, the trifecta produces nothing. So the pattern is reform attempts happen when the built-up gap crosses roughly 40 points while one party holds the government. Both conditions, it's not in either one. Okay, so where is the gap right now? It reset all the way to 0 through the 2010s and into the early 2020s, and then it started building again around 2024. The 2026 Milliman Medical Index put employer health cost trend at 7.9%. Per person cost went from $7,838 to $8,460. A family of 4 is now $37,874 a year in total cost. That's the sharpest annual increase in over a decade outside of a year or two during the pandemic. And wage growth is sitting in the mid threes right now. Do the math forward, and the United States crosses that 40-point line again in the early to mid 2030s. Now, the second clock, the The 2026 Medicare Trustees Report projects the Hospital Insurance Trust Fund is going to be completely depleted in the second quarter of 2033. That's 1 quarter earlier than the report projected a year ago. At depletion, incoming revenue covers about 89% of Medicare Part A expenses. It forces an automatic payment cut unless Congress acts. There's two pressure points: household economics crossing the historical breaking point in the mid 2030s, and a federal fiscal crisis in 2033. It's going to happen in the same 5-year window. That is the core finding of this study. Not that reform is coming, but that the two conditions history says you need are scheduled to arrive at the same time. And they arrive right around the 2036 election year. And notice what the trust fund does and doesn't do in the model. It raises the odds that something gets attempted. It doesn't raise the odds that it passes. A crisis creates urgency, but urgency is not votes.
Now, for the input that gets the most argument, and it rightfully deserves it, there's a hidden assumption buried in pretty much every healthcare forecast I've ever read. The assumption is that people keep their jobs. In this country, right now, your health insurance is predominantly attached to your employment. So any forecast about employer coverage that doesn't model employment is a missing variable. Here's the thing about losing coverage versus paying too much for coverage. They're not the same politically, not even remotely. Expensive coverage makes you angry. Losing coverage makes you vote. In this model, coverage loss drives reform demand about twice as hard as premium paying does. The ACA passed in the middle of a job collapse. It's not a coincidence. So AI displacement is its own input, and it does three separate things. It pushes reform demand up at roughly double the weight. It pushes people into the individual market, which speeds up scenario 4, and it holds down wages, which widens the gap and pulls that breaking point even earlier in the timeline. If you turn that input way up and you scale job losses, structural reform odds go from 70 to 76. Scenario 4 goes to 99.9%. The breaking point moves from 2036 up to 2035. Employer coverage erosion by 2046 goes from 13% to 38%. But there's a counterweight in there that I want to point out. Mass job loss shrinks payroll tax base. Less payroll taxes means less fiscal room to pay for a big new program like universal health care. So while displacement raises the odds that reform is attempted faster, it does not necessarily raise the odds that it passes. You get a stalemate decades, lots of anger, not a new law. This is the least proven input in the model, and I labeled it that way on purpose. Nothing in history looks like AI scale white collar displacement. The closest analog is 2009, and that was just a recession, not machines permanently replacing workers. We could go back down to the dot-com bust, and that's not even close to the same thing. These are different phenomena, and I'd be lying if I told you that this number is well calibrated. So instead of pretending to be precise, the model publishes a range and lets you set it to 0. We're going to do exactly that in just a minute.
All right, so come back to scenario 4 with me. At 10 years, ICRA-style individual migration sits at 35%. Every act of Congress combined, all 4 legislative paths, also sit at 35%. At 20 years, scenario 4 is at 90. All of Congress combined is at 70. One market trend is beating the entire United States Congress, and it doesn't need a trifecta. It doesn't need a filibuster fight, no signing ceremony, and no election. It builds through thousands of individual employer renewal decisions. Now, watch what happens when I take Congress out of the equation entirely. This is the bear case. Reform never really gets going. I've dropped the odds of a trifecta, dropped the odds of filibuster reform, dialed down how hard the squeeze converts into political demand. Structural reform odds fall from 70% to 46%, exactly what you'd expect. In scenario 4, goes up 90 to 97. Look at the 10-year number because that's the one that matters for planning. The baseline was 35%. In the bear case, it's 52. Read that again. Congress doing less makes your group plan go away faster. Because when the public option doesn't arrive and Medicare doesn't expand, the pressure doesn't disappear. It just routes around Washington and comes out through the individual market. It's not an accident of the math. It's built in explicitly into the model. There's a suppression matrix. When one path resolves, it takes the pressure off the ones behind it. If a public option passes, single payer odds get cut by 60%. If single payer ever passed, everything else goes to zero because there's nothing left to reform. The road that matters most is scenario 4. Market migration cuts every legislative attempt by 40 to 50%, which brings me to the cruelest thing in this model. Every person the individual market picks up is one less voter demanding a new law. The market isn't just beating Congress to the fix, it's going to take away Congress's reaction to it. This isn't just speculative, it's measurable right now. The HRA Council reports more than 20,000 U.S. businesses offering ICHRA, individual coverage health reimbursement arrangements, is their primary benefit. That's up 53% in a year. Applicable large employers with 50 or more full-time employees are the fastest growing segment, more than doubling year over year. It's already above what the 2026 baseline was calibrated on, which means if this model is wrong about scenario 4, it's probably wrong on the low side. Now, everything I've said so far is really only worth something if you can play with it, right? So let's play with it. Every assumption in this model is a slider on the page. There's 13 of them. Let's go move them a little bit. Start with the one I told you was weakest, AI displacement, all the way to zero. Nobody loses coverage to a machine, ever. Structural reform odds go from 70.2 to 70.8. They don't really move. The thing everybody wants to argue with isn't load bearing. Scenario 4 does come down, 90 to 75. That's fair. But 75% is still the single likeliest path away from your group health plan by a wide margin in a world with no AI job loss at all. Let's try the other direction. Premium growth from 7.5% up to 12, a brutal decade. The divergence readout jumps to 8.7 points a year, and the breaking point moves all the way from 2036 up to 2031. Structural odds go 70 to 72, barely moves. And here's why that surprised me. It's the suppression matrix again. Cranking the squeeze speeds up scenario 4 so much that it drains the demand for legislation. The market just gets there first on its own. Now, one more. Turn the squeeze off completely. Premiums grow at exactly the rate of wages. Nobody loses coverage. The breaking point never gets crossed at all, ever, out to 2046. Structural reform still lands at 60% on election math alone, and scenario 4 still lands at 57. So in the most benign world this model can produce, the group plan still a coin flip. Which assumption actually is doing the work? The sensitivity panel ranks every prior by how much the answer moves when you bump it, and it isn't close. The probability of a Democratic trifecta per election cycle plus 14.7 points, 6 times bigger than anything else on the board. The AI input everybody wants to fight about is negative 0.9. So if you want to argue with this model, argue with that one. Argue that I've got the odds on one party sweeping an election wrong. That's a political science argument. It's a completely legitimate one to have. But arguing about AI is arguing about a rounding error. One last piece of honesty. The Metaculus community forecast puts federal universal healthcare legislation at roughly 30% by 2040. This model runs near 50 by 2040. 2 reasons, and you can attack either. First, again, definition. My structural bucket counts as a public option, a Medicare buy-in or national rate setting. And Metaculus wouldn't score most of those as universal health care. On single payer specifically, I'm at 7%, which is well under the crowd, not over. Second, the mechanism. This model prices the premium versus wage gap in coverage lost. So you've got a probability table, but what do you do with it on Monday? You don't plan for one scenario. You plan for the spread. 3 moves that'll hold up across every single horizon in that table. Number 1, build funding flexibility into your program now. The one asset that pays off in every scenario is the ability to change how you fund benefits without inflicting organizational trauma. That means self-funded with clean claims data that you actually own, portable stop-loss relationships, and a benefits administration stack that isn't stuck and welded to one carrier. A fully insured plan with 15 years of inertia, it's going to be pretty difficult to pivot your employees away from that logo they've become so comfortable with. Move 2, treat the individual market as infrastructure, not politics. Know your workforce's exchange landscape, meaning what plans exist per county, who qualifies for subsidies, and whether the networks actually work in those areas. You don't have to adopt an ICRA in order to need the fluency. If scenario 4 is the most likely path to play out over the next 20 years, then understanding the individual market is a fiduciary skill, not a political stance. Move 3, watch 2 numbers and ignore absolutely everything else. Number 1, the built up premium versus wage gap. Number 2, the share of workers with employer-sponsored coverage. When that gap gets near 40 points or group coverage visibly starts shrinking, the odds move pretty quickly. And by the time that you're going to see it very clearly, your optionality to build some flexibility was 2 years earlier. So, does any of this matter in 10 years? Here's the answer I can give now instead of just shrug. The government is not taking this over in the next 3 years. That's a 0. Plan accordingly. Over 20 years, something structural is going to pass. It's about 70%. But single payer, the one where your plan is legally eliminated, very unlikely. The most likely path away from your group plan isn't a law at all. It's 90%. It needs nobody's permission, and it's already happening at more than 20,000 companies in the United States. The tool is free and there's no login. benefitsblake.com/forecast. Every assumption I just walked you through is a slider on that page. The sources are all cited with the dates that I checked them. And if you move a slider and you get a different answer, you can copy the link and send it to me. The model refreshes every January against the new trustees report, the new Kaiser Family Foundation survey, the new cost trend data, and any election results. Feel free to argue with my numbers. That's what I'm here for. I'll see you next time.